This is a Canadian-Israeli girl by the name of Jill Rosenberg, and there are conflicting reports, some as recent as just a few minutes ago, indicating that she may or may not have been captured by ISIS. We're going to discuss that. Steve McDonald's here with the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs. And Steve, what's the latest that you're hearing?
Well, the latest we've heard is that Jill Rosenberg's Facebook profile has had a number of messages posted on it lately from friends who may have been in touch with her or with her colleagues among the Kurds. We've heard reports from the Kurdish authorities around Kobani that categorically deny the statement by ISIS-affiliated websites that she's been captured. In addition, we do know that Jill was actually posted in a different location. She originally had been posted around the Syrian-Iraqi border, about 300 kilometers from Kobani. And to get to Kobani, where the incident took place, you have to enter via Turkey, and there's no indication that she did enter through Turkey. So there are increased indications that this may be simply a rumor or propaganda put forward by ISIS affiliates, but we're still not sure right now, so we're watching very closely. Well,
even with these Facebook postings, they come directly from her or just her buddies?
They come from friends and individuals who have been in touch with the Kurds in some cases.
Okay, so we know that information is hard to come by. This is a war zone after all. I mean, you can't rely on either side being accurate.
Absolutely. It's very difficult at this early stage. We also know that in many of the areas where fighting takes place, there's virtually no internet connection. And so really, I think what will definitively resolve this is if and when she comes out and issues a direct statement either from herself or conversely, God forbid, if ISIS has some sort of proof. At this point, they do not have proof. They haven't released a video or any other sort of evidence to confirm these allegations.
Which they've done in the past.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they've been very quick to get to social media and stuff like this.
Absolutely. They're very social media savvy. We know from the cases of UK and US nationals who've been captured. And if you look at her story, she is a goldmine for ISIS propaganda. This is a Canadian Israeli who had served in the Israeli military, a female. They would love to have someone of this status to hold up as a sort of a prize that they can use to promote online. So obviously we're very hopeful that they won't get to do so.
Can you tell me a little bit more about Jill's, you say she served in the military in Israel, like how's that all fit? I don't understand how she gets that position, number one, and then how she goes to fight for the Kurds.
So my understanding is that she was born and raised in Lower Mainland, BC, that she's a member of the Canadian Jewish community, that she moved to Israel around 2006, I believe, and then she had served in the Israeli military for a few years. And,
which isn't unusual. Most people do serve in the Israeli military if they live there, right?
Right, absolutely. And there is something of a coming-of-age aspect for this for members of the Canadian Jewish community. Some young Canadian Jews decide, you know, I've been to Israel, it's a wonderful place, and I feel that I kind of belong here. And so they move at a young age, typically post-university, and they sign up to enlist in the Israeli military. So that's a common story. What's uncommon is that it seems now that she has decided to go and join the Kurds in defending themselves against ISIS. She's one of, obviously, a number of Westerners, typically ex-military members, who have joined the Kurds in these pockets of resistance against ISIS. And, you know, on the one hand, you look at that and it's a very admirable move on her part. It demonstrates dedication for the cause of the Kurds, which is a just cause. On the other hand, obviously, the government of Canada is concerned about this sort of thing. Canada has issued a travel advisory for Syria and Iraq. And on top of that, to a practical extent, there's very little that the Canadian government can do when a situation like this arises, especially in a place like Syria. And so this is certainly something that the government of Canada is not encouraging or advising Canadians to do. But at this point, we're worried for her situation, and right now that's, I think, where Canadians are focused.
Yeah, hard to think of the consequences, but we'll discuss them when we come back from this quick break. Don't go away. Steve McDonald's here talking about Jill Rosenberg and whether or not she's been captured. Suppose she is captured by ISIS. What happens?
Well, I think at that point, ISIS would issue a video. God knows what they're capable of doing to someone of her status. And then I think that the Canadian government would be effectively challenged by ISIS in the same way they've challenged the UK and the US governments to get your troops out or we will do X. And I'm pretty certain Canada would not give into that sort of demand. Neither the UK nor the US government did. And when you're dealing with a brutal terrorist organization like ISIS, you really can't play that sort of game. and then at that point, I think Canada and our allies, certainly in this case, I think Israel, given its intelligence assets around the Middle East, would work together to do everything they can with the support or with the lead of the authorities on the ground. As I mentioned, as a practical matter, there's not much Canada can do on the ground in Syria. Our mission does not extend into Syria. It is confined to Iraq, and it's confined to a number of operations within Iraq, air operations, mentorship operations. But realistically, I think it's a matter of intelligence gathering and sharing and working with authorities who are already in place to do what they can to get her back. But if we cross that unfortunate point, I don't think we're looking at a very happy ending, unfortunately.
No, she could be used to exchange for prisoners, but Canada doesn't have any, as far as I know.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any assets that we've detained from ISIS. Again, most of our missions revolving around the air campaign, the supply campaign, and as well the mentorship effort with local Iraqi forces.
You know, the federal government has put out these warnings that this very kind of a thing could happen if you went over to join that. How many Canadians do you think actually go?
For the pro-Kurdish side?
Yeah, pro.
It's very difficult to say. One report I'd read said that there are literally hundreds from across the West who have joined the Kurdish forces. UKers, US citizens, Canadians,
There's that motorcycle
and Europeans as well.
gang that went to from Netherlands, from Holland.
Right, and on top of this, there's a historic context. There is a long history of individuals from the West joining regional conflicts that they deem to be just causes. There are plenty of examples. Certainly, the most prominent example that comes to mind is that there were a number of Canadians, both non-Jewish and Jewish, who joined the Israeli military in 1948, and mainly the Israeli Air Force, to defend against the invasion of 5 Arab states in 1948. So there is a history of people recognizing a just cause and joining it. However, from Canada's perspective, from the government's perspective, this is very problematic because people can put themselves in very dangerous situations. There's not much the Canadian government can do, as I mentioned, on the ground in Syria, even if we believe, and we do, I'm sure 99% of Canadians believe, that the Kurdish cause is a just one. And that's why there's immense support for Canada's mission to support the Kurds.
Yeah. Okay. Against this background, what role do the Israelis play? I mean, we talk about the Canada exchanging prisoners. What about Israel? Could they do that?
I'm not sure that we would even get into that with ISIS, but realistically, I don't think Israel would be entering any sort of negotiation along those lines with ISIS. Israel has maintained for decades now quiet but important cooperation with the Kurds, typically in the form of intelligence and mentorship, but all of that's fairly below the radar. Israel is not involved in the coalition against ISIS right now, even though Israel obviously strongly supports any effort to roll back ISIS. The fact is Israel's direct role would complicate things given that there are other Arab states in the area involved in the coalition. So I really see Israel's role as a behind-the-scenes role, which is a very important one when you think about the sort of intelligence assets Israel has around the Middle East. Probably no other Western state has the sort of eyes and ears on the ground in the Middle East that Israel has.
No, but they do also have prisoners, and they have done exchanges in the past. In their Palestinian dispute, they did massive ones to get an Israeli military person freed.
Right, and that typically takes place in the case of Palestinian terror groups such as Hamas or Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, or also Hezbollah. The fact is, ISIS really hasn't entered into a direct conflict with Israel. There are elements of ISIS, specifically ISIS sympathizers, arising within Palestinian society, but there hasn't been a direct conflict between ISIS and Israel yet. And so, I don't think we're headed towards a prisoner exchange. I don't know of any ISIS prisoners, for example, that Israel has. And I don't see ISIS as wanting to release Palestinian inmates for that matter.
Well, Jill Rosenberg made an interesting comment. She said, you know, she's there for humanitarian as well as ideological reasons. But, quote, because they are our brothers. Is that a common sentiment in Israel?
I think so. I think there's immense support for the Kurdish people and widespread recognition that Kurdish self-determination, national self-determination, is a just cause. Look, the fact is that the sort of retrogressive forces that are attacking the Kurds today are no different than those that attack Israel. There is a shared enemy, if you will. And ISIS is really not that different from Al-Qaeda, from Boko Haram, from Hamas, from Hezbollah, from other groups that target civilians and do so for the purpose of advancing the idea of an Islamic State, however large or small it may be. In the case of Hamas, it's simply over Palestine. And so I think there's a recognition that there's a shared enemy, but also the fact is what the Kurdish people want is national self-determination, which is no different than that which the Jewish people enjoy in Israel right now.
Yeah, but that's a difficult kind of a balancing act. What's the relationship between Israel, for instance, and Turkey? Turkey has a Kurdish problem.
Right. It's a very fraught relationship. Certainly in 2010, it took a bit of a downturn because a Turkish boat had attempted to breach the arms blockade of Gaza, and that really caused several years of something of a falling out. The fact is there is a lot of economic cooperation between Turkey and Israel. There's a lot of back and forth, well, specifically Israeli to Turkey tourism. And I think that there is a security cooperation below the radar. But the fact is, Turkey itself is caught between two worlds. Turkey is attempting to be accepted by the wider Western world, but at the same time, Turkey sees itself as a leader within the Islamic world, within the Middle East. And so Turkey is constantly torn between what it thinks the West wants it to be versus what I think it really wants to be, which is a leader of the pan-Islamic world, if you will.
Their own caliphate.
Perhaps. And when you see the sort of things that the Turkish government does to their own citizens, it's very worrisome. This is a very repressive regime that treats minorities terribly. You know, the president of Turkey just issued a terrible statement about women, for example. It was exceptionally derogatory to women. So this is not a Western European regime. It definitely exists in the Middle East, and you see it in the way its leaders behave.
Yeah, we're actually going to be discussing that coming up, Steve. So
Great.
Thanks very much. Steve McDonald joining us, Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs.